Dean Brackley was an incredibly prophetic and well-loved individual who helped many of us at United States Jesuit schools better understand what it meant to be in solidarity with the poor. He hosted many of us on trips into El Salvador. He wrote a lot about what Jesuit higher education is all about. And he had a really profound spirituality that he was great at communicating and articulating to people, so that we all, I think, in knowing him and in learning from him, really grew in our understanding of what it meant to be at a Jesuit university and what our real role was in the world.
Dean Brackley stood with the poor, both in El Salvador, in the Bronx, for almost his entire Jesuit life. So what he saw was the world through the eyes of the poor, and he communicated that very effectively. The impact that I hope he will have on the university, on people who knew him, is not that we mourn his loss, but that we pick up the baton and carry on his work. And I think if we are able to look in this country at what's going on through the eyes of the poor, we would realize that they are in a very desperate situation in the face of trying to put the financial house in order here. It looks like we're going to do that on the backs of the poor.
I think the big thing that Dean did was to bring the experience of the Christian community in Salvador to the United States. One of the things that he was involved in was getting a program going in Salvador called the CASA program, which is a program whereby students can go to Salvador and study and live and work. But he was also on our board of directors. Now, I'm not on the board of directors, so I don't know all of the ins and outs of how those conversations go, but you know, my impression is that he kind of kept the social justice piece before the directors, and the experience of the poor before the directors, and that deeply affects the way that the school runs.
Dean was not simply a warm, lovable, holy person. He was all of that. And he showed us something, not everything, but something of God. And while we mourn his loss, we also mine his life for inspiration and guidance. He was clearly a person through whom Christ played in 10,000 places. And remember the axiom that what you see is determined by where you stand. And Dean stood squarely with the poor. So let us celebrate Dean's life not simply through this memorial, but by a concerted effort to open our eyes and our hearts to the poor and vulnerable among us.
Dean's influence at USF began with when I was inaugurated as president at the Mass. He was the homilist, and he spoke very directly and very eloquently to the need for a university to situate itself in the real context of the world. And the real context is about 75% of the world is completely disenfranchised. It was a very powerful homily. And a couple of years thereafter, I invited him to come on to the board of trustees at the university. So he served, the last 9 years, he's been a trustee at USF.
Dean was here during this past summer being treated for cancer. And I was here this summer, and so I was one of the people who was particularly involved in his care. So I spent a fair amount of time with him this summer while he was sick, and you know, that was a real privilege. It was really good to kind of get to know him in that context. He was the guy who lots of groups went to if they were visiting Salvador. So student groups or activist groups or faculty groups or whatever, you know, whenever any group connected to the Jesuits went to Salvador, they would check in with Dean, and he would show them around. And you know, he'd help them understand that. And so his work with delegations, as they say, was really a major thing. And as I've talked to people who knew him here, you know, one of the things they say is, who are we going to connect with now in Salvador? You know?
His call to Jesuit universities was that we have higher standards as Jesuit universities that we need to be accountable to. And those standards have to do with shaping our entire institution to respond to the situation of inequality and injustice in our world. It's not just that we would have a few people working on these issues, but the entire university as an institution needs to be committed to transforming the world. So our research has to be about looking at our contemporary problems and trying to get to the root of those contemporary problems. Our experiences for students need to be about really helping them understand the problems of the world and see how they themselves have a role to play in solving those problems. And I think USF does a great job of that.
He was a wonderful person to be with, thoroughly enjoyable, very simple, warm, approachable, and I think part of that being approachable came from his living and being with the poor and making himself accessible to whomever approached him.